So it looks like we're getting another 90s animated Marvel Legends X-Men action figure, soulmates, and this time it's Cyclops. But is this one any good? Is it accurate to the cartoon? And is he worth your money? Be sure you stick around until the end, guys, because we're going to talk about what X-Men characters we would love to see next in this line. If you support what I do, please click subscribe and hit the bell for notifications so you don't miss a single video of mine when it comes out. This Cyclops, the Jim Lee redesign of Cyclops, is not one of my favorite looks for Cyclops because frankly, I think Jim Lee is one of the worst things to ever happen to the X-Men. Regardless, this look is a very popular one for Cyclops, and it's remained ingrained in the public consciousness ever since it appeared on X-Men the Animated Series. And how is this one, soulmates? Well, it's probably the best version of this Cyclops to date. Now, fair warning on this one, he does come on the new Vulcan body that we saw released in the Bonebreaker wave, but that's to be expected, and honestly, it makes pretty good sense considering that Cyclops is Vulcan's brother, so it's not much of a stretch that they would share the same body. And you know, looking at the entire Cyclops action figure here, it's a pretty good fit for him because it looks like it belongs to him. It looks like what we've seen from the cartoon, what we've seen from the comic books. Now, if I were to improve anything on this one, and there's always room for improvement, let's face it, guys, but what I would do is I would include the torso swivel so that we could have that ab crunch down below and get rid of the waist swivel. I think that would improve this even more than it already is, but you know, as is, it's still pretty decent. Unfortunately, Cyclops doesn't come with a lot of accessories. What accessories he does come with are some extra hands. He has some kind of generic hands that are just kind of resting, and then he has an extra hand that makes it look like he's opening his visor to fire his optic blast. And honestly, I really wish we would have gotten some optic blast effects in here. I think that it would have been nice to include with Cyclops, or even having a light up effect on him would be nice, kind of like the old action figures. I don't feel like that's a very big ask because we got that from Toy Biz for years. Obviously, I'm not a big fan of the cell shading, and I don't really need to go on and on about it because I've told you guys about it in pretty much every video that I've made about these 90s animated X-Men toys, and I don't think a lot of other people like it either. I think that they kind of missed the mark on including that shading, and I see all kinds of videos all over the place about removing the shading on them, so it seems like they shouldn't have bothered to begin with. That said, the cell shading that I'm seeing on this Cyclops here is probably some of the best cell shading that I've seen on them. The shading on it looks like it makes pretty okay sense. I don't see anything that stands out as being really weird. The trouble with this Cyclops, I guess you could say, is that it is a really good rendition of the comic book version of Jim Lee's Cyclops, because most of what you see that differentiates the comic book Cyclops from the animated series Cyclops is all in the shoulder straps. Let's break this down and go through the figure and compare it to what we see on the comic book and the cartoon. Well, we see the little weird bracelets, the buckles that we see on his hands, and we also see those buckles on his boots. We see those on both the cartoon as well as the comic book, so the accuracy there is really well done. When we look at the straps on Cyclops' thighs, those match the cartoon and the comic book both perfectly because they're about the same on both. And the buckles on them are exactly where they should be, so there's nothing to complain about here. It looks right. And even when we get to Cyclops' underwear / utility belt, whatever you want to call it, the pouches look about right on the cartoon and the comic book, and the belt looks right too. That X on his belt, that looks exactly like it should be, a square with an X on it. And moving up the body a little bit, the visor looks very accurate to both sources, and it looks like it should. It does look a little rough though, doesn't it? Because when you look at that visor, it looks like it's been roughly cut in the middle or something. I don't know what's going on there. Maybe it's just a prototype or something, but yeah, what happened there. Really hoping that the actual release is going to be a little bit more put together on the visor in that area. Because man, that craftsmanship is not the best that I've ever seen on a Marvel Legend. Besides that, the rest of the head sculpt, the hair, it all looks really good, and it matches the cartoon and the comic book, because most of what you see on Cyclops from the cartoon is almost exactly the same as what we see from Jim Lee's design in the comic books. The big difference, however, is when we get to those shoulder straps like I mentioned earlier. The shoulder straps are much different on the cartoon than they are the comic book, and you probably wouldn't notice if you're casual or if you don't look closely enough at it, but yeah, there's some pretty big differences there once you observe it. Now, when we look at the strap on Cyclops, what we see on X-Men the Animated Series is the bottom of that strap has a little piece that comes up from his belt, and then it's followed by 3 separate segments that go all the way to that X badge at his chest. We don't see that on the action figure, at least not really well. I do see some notches on there, but it looks like there's a buckle about halfway up that breaks up the space on that strap. Curiously enough, it doesn't match the comic book version terribly well either, because the comic book version is a little bit inconsistent. Moving up the strap a little further, we get to that X emblem on his chest, and this is not exactly correct. It's mostly correct though, because it does have that sort of octagonal shape where there are 4 sides that are pretty short, and then there are 4 other sides that are longer. And the X emblem looks about right to me because it should be circular on there. The thing that's different though is that there should be a notch going down extending from that X on every side to that smaller edge. And I've zoomed in pretty far on this one, but I don't see any of those notches here, but that's something that's present in both the cartoon and the comic book, so they just left it out on this one. Then when we get up to the shoulder strap, there's a gap in between the octagonal X emblem and the shoulder strap itself, and there is no gap on X-Men the Animated Series. So in that instance, it's very much inaccurate to the cartoon. This shoulder strap is much more in line with the comic book version of Jim Lee's design. So once again, it bears more resemblance to the comic book than it does the animated series that this line is supposed to be based on. And then when we look at the other shoulder strap on this action figure, the thinner one, it has segments on it too that are kind of equal almost. But here's the thing, on the cartoon, he doesn't really have the segments. It's supposed to have a little pouch on a mostly smooth strap on the cartoon. Curiously, this doesn't appear to be all that accurate to the comic book version of Jim Lee's design either, because when you look at a lot of the drawings that Jim Lee did of Cyclops way back when, he has that little pouch on them just like you see in the cartoon. It feels a lot like they just weren't paying that close of attention to the actual design on this one, and they just wanted to get it done, and they went with this and called it a day. Is this one worth the money, Soulmates? Well, you have to decide how accurate you want your Cyclops to be. If you're more of a comic book fan of Jim Lee's design, this might be more your speed, even though part of the shoulder strap is not really there, I don't think. If you're looking for something that's much closer to X-Men the Animated Series, well, I'm afraid that it's just not hitting the mark once again, which is no great surprise to me, because on the entire X-Men VHS line, they haven't really tried to do X-Men the Animated Series designs. They've kind of just reissued X-Men action figures more or less, except for, well, this one where it actually features the brand new body mold from Vulcan. But even then, they don't do a design that's like you see on the TV show. So I don't know, guys. Are you okay with that? In which case, go for it. Because even though this one isn't 100% accurate, it's still one of the better releases in the 90s animated X-Men line. Am I gonna get this one, soulmates? Well, I don't know, because it really depends how you guys feel, and if you'd like to see a review of this one, be sure you let me know, guys, and share this video with your friends, and we'll see what happens. You guys know how it is, it just really depends how much interest there is in this one. Well, soulmates, now that we've seen 90s animated Cyclops, who do we want to see next in this X-Men VHS line? Well, we're missing a lot of the core team here, actually, and I wouldn't mind seeing Rogue released. I think that it would be pretty cool to see her done up in the 90s animated X-Men style, and I would not mind seeing Gambit as well, because, you know, they were both part of the cartoon. And Professor X would be pretty cool to see too. I mean, there's so many characters from the X-Men team you could go with here, and even Beast could stand a release. Well, soulmates, what do you think of this 90s animated Cyclops? Is this one that you have to have for your collection? Are you on the fence because of the quality of all the other 90s animated X-Men toys? Or are you just not that interested because maybe it's not accurate enough to the cartoon? I don't know, guys. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and be sure you let me know also what X-Men characters you want to see next in this line. If you'd like to learn more about the Marvel Legends 90s animated Morph action figure, you can check out that video here, soulmates.